Welcome back to the Surfcast Podcast, another edition of what we're now named Lessons from the Logbook. We just changed the name of it again last edition. These episodes are intended for us to go back and look at the last month of our fishing and see what stood out in terms of noteworthy events. Now, this isn't necessarily the size of the fish, the number of fish, that kind of thing. That gets very boring very quickly. It's more what jumps out at us that's sort of unique from the last X period of time fishing. We toyed with different names. We were going to do moons, and we called it months and stuff. So this is coming out in September, but this is basically covers the month of August, the things that happened. So, Toby, I'm going to start. Mm-hmm. And without question, the thing that jumps out to me from my log from the month of August is I actually chunked. I actually took chunks to my spots, one spot that I've wanted to chunk for a few years now, since I did it with you for the first time recently after not doing it for many years. Mm-hmm. And I finally figured out some logistics, and I got out there and chunked, and I was really excited. And before I start peppering you with questions, because that's what I'm going to do, I forgot to mention one thing about this episode that I'm just remembering right now. And that is that we did not plan this, but this is going to be a shark episode. This is going to be a shark episode. It's not Shark Week, but this is going to be a shark episode. So that's part of the theme of what I noticed when I was chunking. No, but going back to what I was about to say, I had to get that in, Crowdar that in there, because I think it's funny that you and I had some very interesting shark incidents. But going back to what I was going to say, one of the cool things about chunking, what's notable from my log, is that time goes by very quickly. When I'm plugging, I feel like sometimes I lose interest pretty quickly. Even if I'm catching smaller fish, my focus just sort of starts to fade. And what I found when I was chunking on my own was that I was in it the whole time. And I actually was able to fish a lot longer. And I think part of that is because the whole time I'm fishing, I have utmost confidence that I'm offering something that the fish want. That no matter, what else I'm potentially doing wrong, the one thing I know I'm doing right is that I have the right thing in the end of the line. When you're plugging, it might be like, well, do they want the white darter or they want the blurple darter? Do they want the darter at all? Or do they want the swimmer? Do they want it deep? Do they want it fast? It's like, well, all that stuff goes away when you're chunking and you're giving them what they want. Now, I know you have examples, I think, of times when chunking actually didn't work and plugging worked better. Mm-hmm. And I've seen that with eels just a few times, too. But for me, when I was doing this, it just felt like in that spot with those conditions, I knew, I'm air quoting for people not watching, I knew that I was doing the right thing. So that's my first note, really my only note for myself personally about chunking. It was fun. I'm actually playing with an experiment that you know about that I don't want to give away yet, so I'll give that away in the future using a new kind of bait. Let me put it that way. Besides just bunker. Something that I catch myself. We'll see if people can figure it out. But something else I can catch myself that I'm trying to use with bait. I'll put that out there. But Toby, the big story for me with the chunking was the unbelievable dogfish. I mean, outrageous. So a couple of nights it was just annoying, where it was just, a lot of them. But one night in particular was bananas. I could not get the freaking chunk in the water for 5 seconds without it starting to be chewed on. And I'm talking for 4 hours straight. I don't know how many I landed. It was a lot. And some of them were massive. And I remember texting you. You already know this. There were ones that exceeded the 50-inch mark on my rod. I mean, these were massive dogfish. And they are so annoying because they spin in the line. They chafe your leader up. You constantly have to change your leader. So then I'm not only just, I'm not just being annoyed because they fight like a wet rag and, they're not my target. I'm also having to cut down my leader constantly and constantly change it. Mm-hmm. But one of my biggest questions for you, and this will be a lesson from the log because, we say lessons from the log, but then we're not really giving everyone lessons. We're not teaching a lesson, but we're hoping you're gaining lessons from our conversation. Do you think that places that have that level of dogfish activity, that have that much life, is that a good thing for stripers? Or is it a bad thing? Does it mean that it's like a fishy area? Or does it mean that the fish are going to be like, screw this, there's way too much competition? What's your thoughts on that?
I will answer that, but I want to make a point. I'm going to throw something to you after I answer, because I want to ask you a question. Do not let me forget about where you said you're not worried so much about the plug is the right color or that. So I got something.
Okay, great. I'm excited.
But as far as that, I don't have any real hard scientific data to back this up. It's more just anecdotal evidence that I've come across over the years. When I get into a sampling of dogfish, meaning they're popping in here and there, the striper fishing can still be good. I've had some very good nights where I feel like there's just a small enough population of dogfish around where the striped bass can still at times outcompete, and it's usually the bigger fish. I have found that like when there's just some dogfish, if it's 2 or 3 doggies to every bass, those bass are bigger, and that's where I think it's the outcompete. That the schoolies, not that the dogfish are eating the schoolies, but just because they hunt in wolf packs, they just are cuckoo aggressive. I think they'll push the smaller bass out. But I think those bigger ones, not that the bigger bass are eating the dogfish, but I think those dogfish might, give them a little space. So I think I don't think of it too much as it's the potential, because I'm always fishing sort of the same spots. It's just a matter of have the dogfish rolled in. But on those nights where I've had, like when you texted me after that crazy dogfish night you had, those nights I leave, because when I've tried to fish through it, I can't recall a time where I was ever able to have success on striped bass. That there becomes a point where the biomass of dogfish in front of you is just too much. Now whether those bass actually move off or they just straight can't compete, I don't know, but it's proven to me that it's not worth trying to push through.
And that's really interesting, because that's what I was wondering. I mean, I'm really not exaggerating. The listeners listening to this, I could not go 10 seconds before they started chewing on it. And then you're like, well, I won't set on them. I'll just let it chew on them, because I don't, maybe they'll drop it. And it's like, well, then they were just hooking themselves. And then they'd hook themselves and they'd get all wrapped up in a rock, or they get hung up on the bottom. They kept getting hung up on the bottom with them. And like, oh my God, it was a nightmare. But the thing that it pointed out to me that I would have never known otherwise had I not chunked is, how many times do I go there to plug, and that's what it looks like in front of me, and that's why I'm not catching fish? When I show up and go, man, it feels really fishy, and these conditions look really good. Well, they probably are good, and there's just inundated with dogfish. Like, how many times is that happening? And I'm going, what am I doing wrong? Do I not have the right plug? Is the wind not quite 5 knots strong enough? Is the barometric pressure not at the right value? Well, no. In fact, it's just the fucking dogfish are here in front of me.
Yep.
So that really messed with my head. That was a big thing that I came away with, like, oh God. Now every time I'm here, I'm going to be screwed thinking about it.
And you'll rarely hook dogfish on plugs. I think I've had 1 or 2 ever. I've taken them on soft plastics. They have, but again, even that, not very many. But I've taken them a couple times. So like lending to that, it'd be one thing if when you're plugging, maybe you hit them, even if you hit 1 or 2 on those outings. But I would be willing to bet that on that night when you had the crazy number of dogfish chunking, that if I stood next to you and plugged, I probably wouldn't have had a damn thing.
No, you wouldn't have had a damn thing. I've only caught 1 on a plug, and it's because I snagged it in the tail. And that was actually that was only last year, in fact, on a glider. Yeah. And I have a really funny photo of me holding it up, hanging from the tail. What was the thing that you wanted to say though?
Yeah. So you said when you're chunking, you kind of eliminate that. Am I throwing the right color? Am I throwing the right plug?
Oh, I'm not gonna like this. I know.
No, you're not. It's gonna mess with you.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like this.
It does in a lot of ways. I feel it eliminates personally, at least. It eliminates a lot of that because you're comparing. You could have a plug bag full of plugs, and it could be a darter, it could be a needle, it could be a soft plastic. They're so different. When I'm chunking, regardless of if I'm doing well or not well, I always wonder: am I going to be doing better if I'm throwing the tail versus the head? Oh. So that gets into my mind because the classic stereotype is the head chunk is the best piece, and that's what gets the bigger bass. And certainly there's something to that. I won't get into it right now, but I think there's a whole lot to that beyond just they like the head. There's some other stuff that I've found. But I will say, the biggest striped bass that I've taken chunking, not like the single biggest, but like the chunk of the largest, heaviest striped bass have all been on the tailpiece and a smaller tailpiece. So if I'm doing really well, I'm always thinking, and I always make a point to know what I have out there at that point in time, because I fish it a little differently and it reacts differently on the bottom. So if I have a tail and I'm doing really well, maybe the head's going to be doing a little better. Or if I'm not doing well with the tail, I'm thinking, do I want to switch the head? So hopefully this doesn't get into your mind now, but there's still the mind game, for me at least, is still there. But I will agree with you that it does make the nights pass. But the little piece I wanted to ask about that for you,
okay.
You said time goes quickly.
Okay.
Do you follow my OCD of counting and keeping track of time for your chunks, or do you just fish the chunk till you're done and then pull it back in and take another cast?
I do not count. So I did it in two different spots. One, I didn't have an opportunity because the dogfish were so unbelievable. But the other spot, I basically just looked at my watch and gave it a ballpark.
Yeah. Because, well, that makes my nights go faster because
right. Yeah.
every chunk
Yeah.
is 10 to 12 minutes.
Right.
So I'm making my night go longer because I'll fish that one chunk through. It's got to at least go. Even if a minute and a half in, I'm like, nothing's happening. By the time I get to the end of that chunk, it's 12 minutes, 13, 10, whatever. And I have to put another chunk on to try. So now it keeps adding. It's very easy for me to add another 10 minutes and another 10 minutes on. So my chunky nights do go long, even when they're unsuccessful because of that fact, which is...
Yeah, that's interesting. I find when I'm doing running, if I'm doing like intervals and I break them down into smaller intervals, so I'm doing like 30 seconds of something or 2 minutes of something, and I'm not like, okay, I'm going to run for 30 minutes. That makes the time go by faster. And I hadn't really thought about that till you just said that. Like when I'm constantly looking at my watch and I'm doing these little 5-minute, 7-minute intervals, it kind of keeps me engaged longer versus if I'm plugging and I'm like, I got to be here for 2.5 hours. It's kind of like, God, it's stretching away. So maybe there's something to that as well. I hadn't really thought of that. It was a fun experience, and I'm hoping that I can get more of it in September and maybe in October specifically too. And I do feel that, one of the benefits of using the chunk is when you're doing this weightless style chunking, which we've covered in a previous episode, it ends up where it ends up. And at the one spot, I was a little bit surprised where it ended up. Ultimately, if I just let it completely go, it was ballpark, but it was a little bit different than what I thought. And I'm going to keep that in my mind. We keep talking about it, which is funny, but I'm going to keep that in mind actually for fly fishing because it is closer to shore than I thought. And that kind of brings some interesting opportunities. So
yeah, there's one of my chunking spots. It helped me learn. It's kind of funny. So it helped me learn where the big fish will set up, but I haven't taken. So in this case, like you're saying, the chunk ends, if it goes a full swing drift all the way through, it ends really close to shore. And I have taken some massive fish. I'm talking within 15 feet of the shoreline, where at the time that I have the take, I'm like facing parallel. So they're obviously coming in close, but I've only taken one even halfway decent fish that close in that spot plugging, because I had the same idea. I'm like, I kind of felt it was like the natural deposit of like in trout fishing. You know how you get those, you have the bubbles, you watch the bubbles, and where those congregate, well, that's a feeding lane. That's where the fish are setting up. The trout are in the stream, so you want to fish there. I mean, the number of times Steve has pointed that out when we're working new water. Steve Colton, the fly fisherman friend, he points that out. There's this bubble line, and there's the end, and you put your fly there, and bang, that's where the fish are. So I thought there might be like a much more transferable to plugging lesson off of that. And it's like always the chunks, but never the plugs so far for me in that case. But it is interesting to see where it puts it, that natural congregation of, the anything that's drifting down that your chunk ends up in.
It's interesting. Speaking of plugging, as I'll wrap my portion of my lessons with log up, I did in August see mullet, and that's got me very excited for the fall. I mean, I know this is coming out in September. That bodes very well for the months of September and October. That doesn't always happen where I see them, and it's got me very excited. It's such a fun plug bite. I did fish it. I got an opportunity to fish it a few times with the plugs. And I was testing out the new, and it's not testing because it's been out for a while, but that new Z-Man Mulletron, the rigged one. And it looks pretty sweet in the water. So I don't know what's going to happen with that. I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe that's something you want to check out, people listening to this. It's pretty cool. So that's been fun messing around with that. No, crazy success. Nothing much bigger than, well, basically slot fish, basically is what I've been dealing with so far. But the fish got to find them. And then the last thing I'll say for my lesson in the logbook, this is the Surfcast Podcast. And I'm going to try to stick to surfcasting, but a huge chunk of my August was spent on a 2-week vacation. It was my wife's first 2-week vacation of her whole life. It was our vacation for the year, and we were freshwater fishing. And we caught so many bass. And I actually have all kinds of lessons I learned from that. Things maybe I'll bring up in the future about confidence and overconfidence and thinking you got things figured out. And if you just get lucky, and there's all kinds of stuff in there. And, what a boat does for you, because we were fishing from a little tiller with a 10 horsepower engine, and being able to be like, they're not here, just blast to the next spot, and then they're not here, just blast to the next spot, instead of like, well, let me work and change my lures, I just blast to the next one. But the big thing, and the thing I want to say, is this is coming out after Bill was just on, and in that episode we were talking about the rattle trap, and I was talking to Carly about it, and we were joking about it and stuff, and about, because I liked it as a kid, and I have these rattle traps that are 25 years old. They're from when I was a kid. And she's like, I'm going to use them. Well, long story short, the rattle trap became the lure of the whole trip. And I got a really solid 5+ pounds largemouth on it. And we picked up a few, nice 2-pound plus smallmouth on it. We caught almost 200 smallmouth, and we caught like 60 largemouth. And I would say close to 30-40% of those were on the rattle trap. So, translation. I mean, I know this is a Surfcast podcast, but I could not let that go without bringing that up. So, if you've got a 25-year-old rattle trap sitting in your tackle box, maybe go back and break that puppy out. So
throw some fresh hooks on it, though.
Yo, these weren't even fresh hooks. That's the thing. Oh man, yeah, bad. So that's some of the stuff that was going on. We're already practically at a full episode length, so I'll let you go now, I guess, Toby.
So, yeah, continuing with the unintentional theme for the log for the last few weeks of fishing, the sharks. I mean, it was more than just Shark Week. It was Shark Weeks month. And anyone that follows me on social media will see that it was shore, it was boat, and there was even more than I talked about online with, which I'll get into here, more experiences. It was just all about sharks. But it started out, I had high hopes. I mean, got a hold of some bunker chunks, was excited. I said, all right, it was my first night chunking on the season. And I go into every session with chunking, high hopes. But even more so now that I'm not getting them as easily as I used to, not doing as frequently as I was able to for a variety of reasons. But like right off the bat, first chunk, I got dogfished. I didn't hook them, but it was definite dogfish. That annoying pickup, run a little bit, drop, psych. Maybe it's something coming around, and it was just getting chewed on. The first one, might have been even the second and third. And I put another chunk out, had it sit. A couple minutes goes by, and I started thinking to myself about the sharks, because I'd been seeing some of the boat guys were hitting sharks already. I'm like, all right, there's more than just dogfish around. And when I have caught hooked into sharks in the surf in the past, which I'm assuming is generally brown sharks, they'll almost hit the line. And what I kind of envision is, I don't know exactly how they feed, but they're a hell of a lot bigger than your average striped bass. So they actually will bump the line, whether it's their tail as they come around it, they circle on it, their body. I have had some really big striped bass do that too, though. So this happened, felt the line, had been thinking about the sharks, and my rod doubled down. The water exploded, went nuts. I immediately knew, all right, there's my first shark hookup of the year, and it lasted seconds, and then just popped. My 50-pound, mono leader was no match for the teeth and the skin of the shark. And I always get kind of excited. Like, on the one hand, I get a little nervous knowing there's sharks around, but in reality, I'm like, it's just a brown shark. They're nothing to worry about. And I don't run into them as much, for instance, as others, but I'll get into that too in a minute. And I've caught some really big bass literally right after I've been sharked in the past, when my bunker has been taken. I mean, some very large fish. So I get excited for that too. So I retied and I was like, it's on. Boom, chunk out, dogfish. And it was a dogfish night from there on. I don't think I landed a bass the whole tide.
So maybe it's even more of a dogfish theme that you got going here. But
yeah,
yeah.
Maybe that's it. Not sharks, it's just damn dogfish. But, I mean, the way I look at it too, it's the middle of summer, chunking. It's become a thing. Because, and I say become, like a lot of the surfcasters last couple of years, it's like, it's common. August hits in southern New England, and you start running into sharks. And it was not that long ago that it wasn't a thing. And, I mean, I can look back at the Go Tight years, which Go Tight was like the early 2000 teen range, like 13 to 8, 15, something like that, whatever, that range. And, for instance, Jay and I were chunking and eeling a ton. I mean, more so on some seasons than I've done at any other point in time. And we never once had a shark encounter.
That's wild.
Now I can't even imagine that. Like, I can't conceive the amount of time that I threw eels, even just eels, because so many guys, and I'll get to that too in a sec, eels getting sharked. The only predation that he and I ever ran into during Go Tight, we had a seal set up at one of our locations. And actually, I never had it happen, but Jay lost a couple of fish and a couple of his needlefish to seals. And the only reason we know, I mean, I guess 100% we don't fully know, but the reason we assume it was just the seal was because there was some boat guys by daytime that were complaining and seeing it and watching the seal take. And I ended up seeing him on one of the nights come after my bass in close. So it is a rather new occurrence running into these sharks like this. I mean, even I was thinking about prepping for this, the dogfish. The first time I ever had a dogfish encounter in the surf was around 2009, maybe okay. Even 2010.
Okay.
And I eeled a lot in that time frame, and it was on eels. And it was funny. It was in the eastern stretch of where I surfcast quite a bit, and I saw them slowly move west.
Interesting.
Over a couple of years. Not over like one season, but over time, I kept marking, well, this is the furthest west. Well, no, now this is the furthest west. And then a season or two, well, now, and they moved west. I mean, I've never really cared enough to look into their population where they're at, but
yeah, I don't know anything about them.
Yeah, even just the dogfish are way more prevalent, let alone, the brown sharks that we're seeing. So,
which brings us to your next point.
Yes, it brings it to the next one. I chunked, and I didn't have enough chunks and didn't have a regular supply on them, but I was on a bait mode, so I was like, all right, I dug some frozen eels out of the freezer, some dead eels. I was like, that's cool. I'm gonna fish my dead eels on a big circle hook the way I've done in the past, which I haven't done the last couple of years, but I was kind of in that bait mode, so I was like, all right, let's do it. It's midsummer. This is when I was hardcore eeling. I loved deep of summer for the eel nights, and so I go out that first night, dogfish. I'm back on the dogfish. And then another couple of dogfish. And then I hooked into something that was not a dogfish and was not a striped bass. It was a very, very large brown shark, which a friend was with me this night who's caught some by boat, and we he, based on his best estimate, because we lost it literally right in the wash, we got a good look at the thing with some bright lights, figured about a 150-pound class brown shark.
Nice.
Yeah, which, again, is strange because now this is the first time I've had that happen on an eel. All of my past brown shark hookups were on chunks. And this was very far west in the range of where I fish.
Interesting.
But I was like, whatever, maybe it's a bit of a fluke, trying to roll the dice. I got a couple more dogfish that night. Went back the next night with another friend, and I was able to stay away from the brown sharks on the second night. It was just doggies for me, but my partner for the night landed, and we actually landed and were able to photograph. You're not allowed to. They're protected, so you're not allowed to target the browns. We're not going for the sharks in general because of a whole other realm of concerns with the legality of it. So we were striper fishing, but he actually landed 2 brown sharks. One was in like the 75 class, and one, based on the night before, we're guessing is a 125-pound class.
Big.
Which,
yeah.
Yes. And now I'm looking at, I haven't landed a shark, hardly ever ran into them in years, and now in consecutive nights, over 2 nights there was 3 brought right to our feet. And I mean, I got a couple of photos, and my wife was not too happy to show her what was swimming around out there where I'm fishing.
That's funny.
But I didn't think too much of it again. Still, we'll get to where I probably should have in a sec, but it really got me thinking about the population on these sharks. Like, not so much, I mean, everybody's saying it's this thing, it's that thing, negatives. I mean, I guess I'm kind of still in the realm of it's a positive that we have around because, the brown sharks, for instance, were at one point in time, because I've looked into them, the primary targeted inshore shark species on a commercial level, and they were overfished, which is why they're still under protection. And now, I mean, I had those 2 run-ins. I'm seeing, like, social media for a couple weeks now, before we recorded this, has been just filled with cases of guys, men and women, surfcasters in New England. I'm not even saying Long Island, New Jersey, because you guys have had them for a while now, but New England, and not even just southern New England, hitting them in the surf. I mean, there was a even as much as the tiger shark.
Oh,
I
the
mean,
tiger shark on the Cape. Yeah, the red drum and the tiger shark on the Cape recently. Yeah, wild stuff.
So
I'm out. Brown shark, okay, they're big, they're very sharky, they're very much a shark. They're not like a doggy where you're like, is this really a shark? It's like a fish.
Dogfish are cute. Like, I'll catch them. I bear hug them sometimes, put them under my armpit and unhook them and look at them, and they're just like,
yeah. They're doing the twist thing, but like, they're like whatever. Brown shark's a shark. You're like, that's a shark. It's got big teeth and stuff. But it's still a brown shark. When I see tiger shark, I'm like, I'm out. That's it. Oh, yeah. I'm done. I mean, I'm done the wetsuit. Forget it. I'm out. There's no way. They eat license plates. They bite everything. Forget it. I'm out.
And as I've said to you a few times, and a couple of the guys I fish with, like, the browns, I'm not fearful that a brown is going to swim up, see my leg, and be like, yo, I'm going to eat that.
Right.
What my fear with them, again, which we'll get to.
Right, this is getting to your next story.
Is on 2 occurrences in the past when I was fishing with Jay. And we were in the surf, thigh to waist deep, and he was sort of diagonally in front of me. I'm standing slightly behind him while he's unhooking a 10 to 20-pound class striper, and a brown shark went to take the bass from his hand, and at the last moment turned off and basically buzzed us both, and the wake hit us. So what I've always thought was, that's going to happen. It's going to go, either you're going to move the fish and it's going to accidentally catch your thigh, which even you talked me down off of that ledge to a pretty good degree. I rationalize it, but maybe they'll accidentally get your hand. So I think that's when the real bite is going to happen. And I think someone might have last year, but I think that's more of the danger. So a couple nights after my eel brown shark night, I said, I'm done messing around with this stuff. I'm just going to go plug. And I'd gotten the Salt X2 I got in hand. So I was like, awesome, great. I'm going to go plug tonight. I want to see what this thing does. So far, the results have been very positive, but I started, I was plugging, got a couple of bass, and it was pretty consecutive, quick bass, cast, nothing, fish, nothing, got a few. And then I had a fish I hooked. It went a bit crazy, dumped a bunch of line, and popped. And then just my plug came in. I'm like, I thought nothing of it. I mean, how many times have we had like a fish throw a plug and no issue?
Right.
Well, then like 30 minutes or so go by with nothing. I mean, the water's dead. I'm like, maybe the school just moved on. No worries. Then I get another fish finally. Then I hook into one. Goes crazy. Dumps a bunch of line. I think it pops off. So I reel in, and now that's a touch of weight. And maybe I picked up some weed. Sometimes the bass will go in the rocks, and you reel in a plug with weeds on it. As it gets into my vision, I say, I still have the head of a striped bass on here.
Nice.
And it comes up, and I grab it, and I'm estimating a 12 to 15 pound top striped bass. So not a tiny little rat schoolie, but not a giant either, but a good enough fish. Perfect half moon right out of it. Like, all right, I know what happened. This thing got sharked, bit it off, and the shark swam away with his meal. And I'm like, cool, I'm finally going to get a photo of this. I get to be that guy on social media now taking a picture of, I got sharked,
Join
that
the
whole
club,
thing.
right?
I was even ready in my mind to post the next day, which I never do. I never post right away. So I take the first picture, and I just sort of hold it out, and I'm standing on a rock, a good ways out in the water. I'm, thigh to over thigh deep, and I look at the, preview, and it's blurry. I'm like, no worries, I'll take another picture. I stick it out, stick my arm out, flash. The flash goes off, and the water exploded in front of me to the point where I not only took wake, I had spray hit my face. So apparently what happened is either the shark that I had hooked, that took my bass, came in for bite 2, or his buddy wanted to finish off his meal and was, I'm assuming, coming up to bite the rest of the striper, and my flash spooked him off. But he was close enough that, your mind starts running. If I hadn't flashed, would I have been the one to have the shark accidentally grab my hand as it's going for the, chunk of striper head? And I mean, I let out a scream and a couple of profanities and unhooked it and heaved that head as far as I could. I was shaking because I'm processing, what I've been saying was going to happen, almost happened to me. And, a sane person would say, I'm going back to shore, except for the fact that I've got deep water behind me now. So I have to, in order to get to dry land, I'm going to have to get into the water at least shoulder deep for a stretch, where there's now a chum slick, obviously actively feeding sharks. Blood has now been in the water. I mean, there's just stuff running through my mind. So I fished. I ended up going fishing another hour and a half or so, but it was funny. It was dead for my next 20 to 30 minutes of casting. And then they came back in. So I don't know if I can't even remember now if I thought of it, maybe what I was telling you. Someone said, I bet that first one was another predation, because it was the same scenario of the fish getting hooked, the thrash, the weight coming in, no fish. It happened twice in a row. The second time I just happened to stay hooked to that striper head. So it was definitely the couple weeks of the shark in the surf for me.
It's wild. I mean, at least the flash scared it away. My fear is I see all these social media posts where guys are like dangling the head in the water with the light on them. And the sharks are going to learn that either the light isn't afraid, don't be afraid of the light, or the light needs food. And they're like dangling it. Get that head out of the water and get it the hell away from you. Why are you dangling in front of you filming it? Get it in and get it out away from you. Get those. I mean, forget about like getting bit and all that stuff. Just get them away from you so you can get back to fishing. Why you're out there like playing with the sharks? Like, it drives me crazy.
Yeah, if it happens to me again, if I'm out in a place where I can't get immediately to dry land, I'm tossing that thing as far as I can and letting it clear out. If I'm on land, I might go up dry and take the photos because, I mean, it's kind of a cool photo. Like, it's to wild. Have happen. Like, I obviously, I don't want them eating stripers and everything else, but, like, it's something we don't have up here. All the Florida guys on my post, like, oh, get ready, that's the bull sharks every day. You can't even touch the water. Well, it's, for us here in New England, it's not It's common, but it's still not that common.
It's still not that common. But you know, Toby, and I don't know if you got anything else to say, but I will say this in closing about that, is that you did this to yourself. Because we were talking about this coming into the month. We were like, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to chunk, and we're blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh, man, there's been sharks, and, we don't really get sharked, and we've only had limited run-ins, but I've heard about this, and I've heard about that. And then we talked about it on the podcast, and you asked me about, what would I do? And then I said I'd like to shark, and that spurred some personal conversations for you and I off the podcast. I feel like you manifested this. It's like it happened. It's crazy. It's wild because you had the run-in right away, and then you had those sharks with Jay, and then it's wild.
Yeah, it's been it definitely. I was thinking about it too. Like, there was something else we had said. There was something like that we talked to the podcast that happened. I think it was when you lost a plug. You said you hadn't lost a plug in forever, and then like right after you did. So we got to start putting some positive vibes out there about. Maybe next episode we'll talk about catching 50s, or I'd take 40s right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's manifest that.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to talk about the fall next episode and how good the fall is. That's what we're going to do. That's what we'll do. Yeah?
Perfect.
This has been a weekly edition of the Surfcast Podcast. You can find out more about the podcast at surfcastpodcast.com, or definitely check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, at the Surfcast Podcast.